Hello there, you're tuned into 7Edition's Budget 2020 with me, Muhammed, Ahmad, Hamdan.
And me, Pritha Manivannan, will be your hosts for the next hour.
Now, 3 experts will be joining me to discuss how Budget 2020 will affect you and help reduce your cost of living.
And later, I'll be bringing you the highlights from today's budget tabling and your news of the day.
Budget 2020 has been tabled in Parliament earlier today with much focus given to spur the economy, easing the cost of living burden of the people and government reforms. This is the second budget under Pakatan Harapan government with themed driving growth and equitable outcomes towards shared prosperity. Now, to kickstart the discussion, let's take a look at some of the highlights of the federal budget. The Finance Minister has assured that the Goods and Services Tax GST will not be making a comeback. Other notable highlights include 18% discount on all plus highway toll charges, a one-off payment of 500 ringgit for civil servants grade 56 and below, and 250 ringgit for pensioners, 50 ringgit increment for cost of living allowance, COLA for civil servants, 30 ringgit credit into the e-wallet of every Malaysian who are 18 and above and earn less than 100,000 ringgit a year to promote cashless society. New social protection scheme My Salam to expand its insurance coverage from 36 to 45 major illnesses for individuals aged 65 and below. 20 million ringgit for the development of e-sports in recognition of its potential. Now, this is double than last year's allocation of 10 million ringgit. And last but not least, the threshold on high-rise property prices in urban areas for foreign ownership will be lowered to 600,000 ringgit from 1 million ringgit. Now, to discuss more on Budget 2020, we have Senior Research Associate from Khazanah Research Institute, Hawati Abdul Hamid. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And University Malaya Professor of Economics, Professor Dr. Raja Rasya. Thank you both for joining us tonight. Now, we're going to go straight into it. 18% discount on all plus highway toll charges. What's your take on it, Professor?
It's blanket or during non-peak times?
I'm not too sure. Yeah, I'm not too sure about the...
I thought the information that, given out by YB Guaning was about non-peak times, 18%. To some extent, it's good. I think it's good because then it's not too high as a discount, so that it doesn't really affect very much consumer behavior in relation to those who use the highways. But at the same time, it also encourages people who can then relieve these highways during peak times to times when they can actually take the highway. So in a way, it can ease jams. So I think that's a good initiative.
Do you think that this also hints that the government will proceed with its plan to take over Plus Highway?
Yeah, very much in the discussion. I think one of the things that's exciting about the budget is, despite the fact that you hear lots of goodies, but at the same time, the fiscal deficit is also going down, suggesting that they will be more efficient in the allocation of the resources. So that's a good thing. Now, whether they'll go ahead, I think their science suggests, I think they are even talking about which are the highways they're going to take over gradually and how the negotiations are going. So I believe in the end, if they're going to be here much longer, I believe they will fulfill that.
Are you in favor of the government taking over the Plus Highways, or are you not in favor of that?
I'm in favor of that. I'm in favor of that. Also voted in by the people because that was one of the promises they made.
Okay.
And a highway is a public utility.
Is it good for our economy if the government takes over the highways?
I mean, if one has the impression that governments won't do business as the private sector, then that will be a problem. I don't take that. If you have proper appraisal mechanisms, to ensure that costs are always kept low. It doesn't mean, even in Korea, for example, banks were state-owned from 65 to 85,
right,
and they did well. So I think it's the appraisal mechanism, the governance system that you put in place to ensure that performance is there.
All right. Hawati, 50 ringgit increment for cost of living allowance, COLA for civil servants. Is this significant?
Well, you have to look from, if household perspective, 50 people can be big for low income household, but
50 ringgit for low.
Yeah, I mean, if you are earning like 2,000 and below or 3,000 and below, 50 ringgit can be something that can cushion a bit of your spending. But then, if you have this bigger household, probably that can be negligible.
You personally do you think this increment should be increased further, or are you okay with the 50 ringgit increment? Do you think it's justified, 50 ringgit increment?
I am of a view that in order to help, this is not the only way to help households to weather or to cushion their cost of living. For example, like, I mean, if you're trying to continue to give cash aid, to what extent? To what would be the limit of giving this? Given that people have different preference, different needs, or probably wants. So another way to actually address household cost of living or their standard of living, probably trying to promote from market perspective, for example, trying to create a better quality job, higher value added job, so that I believe that with betterment in the labor market environment, this would indirectly help a lot of issues that we are facing today, like high cost of living and things like that.
Right. Professor, I'm going to go back to you. Being a professor of economics, the government said that they have no plan to reintroduce the goods and services tax. Are you in favor of this? Do you think this is good for the country?
Actually, on my own as an economist, and the way Jim Merley first introduced it, the Nobel laureate who won the prize for the goods and services tax, I think it would have been a good idea simply because you will have everyone, including
good
foreigners,
idea to re-implement the goods and services tax.
Yeah, but I understand the political situation that actually drove the decision not to have it, and under such circumstances, it's impossible to expect a government that has made that sort of a pledge to come back.
Okay.
Now, returning to this, I think the position that I see, again, this is an important observation that I saw. I am not privileged to looking at the statistics, except to hear the finance minister explaining it. You're actually looking at a reduced budget deficit, even though the fiscal side of it is expanding. It's, in other words, he didn't talk so much about monetary incentives and so on. Of course, for the lower income or even the SMEs, you have, but that again goes to fiscal policy, which is reducing taxes, corporate taxes for SMEs from 18 to 17%. But having said all those things, I think you are expanding the fiscal side of it, which requires government expenditure, and at the same time, you are actually not taxing that much more. And then in that sense, not introducing GST, which actually casts the net much wider.
Great. Now, thank you, Doctor. Now, before we move on, let's go over to my colleague Pritha in the other studio for the breakdown on this issue.
All right, thank you, Muhammad. Now, according to an expenditure guide for Malaysians living in the Klang Valley called Belanjawanku, this is the estimated minimum monthly expense for a single adult. Now, let's take a look at the average. For a public transport user, the budget estimate is around 1,870 ringgit per month. They have different allocations on utilities, food, and discretionary activities. As you can see from here, a big chunk of their spending goes to food, followed by housing, and these varies according to where they live. Now, moving on, this is the same for these other essential categories that take a big portion out of their monthly budget. As for a family of 4, they need a minimum of 6,620 ringgit a month. A big chunk goes to transportation, where they need a minimum of 1,040 ringgit. For some families, conditions may be challenging as the cost of providing proper childcare are on the rise. Now, for 2 kids, they will need at least 1,150 ringgit for childcare. And to put a roof over their head, their housing expense is at 870 ringgit a month. Now, according to Bank Negara, despite the fact that the average household income is listed as above a living wage estimates, 1/3 of households in Kuala Lumpur are earning below the living wage. Now, while the cost of living is significantly lower than Singapore, we do have a higher inflation rate. Now, back to you, Muhammad.
Thank you, Pritha. Now, Hawati, in your opinion, what are some of the items included in the budget, in the 2020 budget, that you think can help reduce the burden of the rising cost of living faced by average Malaysians, whether in the cities or in rural areas?
Well, I can see that there are few initiatives that being introduced or continued by the government to actually weather or cushion the cost of living, high cost of living facing the citizens. For example, like BSH, Bantuan Sara Hidup is one of them. And then now government recently have introduced this more targeted fuel subsidy that can actually help people to actually manage their transportation costs. Another thing I think is all these bantuan for all vulnerable group, for example, like elderly, people with disability, and of course we know that government continue to give aid to people which is vulnerable due to circumstances, for example, like farmers or rubber tappers who are facing this rainy season for not able to generate income. So these are the things that I see that a way of government to redistribute income and to also address living cost issues.
But these incentives are more targeted towards the low-income earners. What about the B40 group, which continue to be neglected, in my opinion, because I'm in that category myself, and I feel like the B40 group is the most is the group that is struggling the most.
Okay. In my opinion, Kazan recently did published a study on demarcation of Malaysian household. What we see is that actually it's not really B40. We think that, of course, it has been taken up as a target group for government to assist them, but we feel that B40 can both be at the same time a very wide group or at the same time as a very small group. What I mean by this, for example, we know that actually those household who are really require needs, actually direct cash assistance, for example, welfare aids, actually I think it should be confined to B20 so that the resources can be spread more, not spread thinly for this smaller group. But at the same time, we saw that actually these people in the middle, for example, why M40 are making a bit of noises on cost of living.
A lot of noises, actually.
Yeah, because they are taxpayer, but at the same time they don't get access to all these.
They're not eligible for all these incentives and aids.
Yeah, so that
including myself,
especially
and
those
I can't afford a home.
Yeah, especially those who actually have higher number of dependents. For example, we did a study and tried to equalize this income. We saw that actually when we take into account the dependents, the number of dependents of this M40 household, their well-being sometimes is quite similar to those of B40. So this is something that we have to rethink again, but at the same time, I would like to actually trigger our thinking in terms of approaches of assisting household. I think that welfare aid, direct cash assistance should be confined to a smaller group, but yet we should do a lot of initiative to empower people to participate in economic activity, to increase their income, and all this access to all these initiatives should be extended to a wider group, not just B40.
Very much. All right.
Same question?
Yeah. Now, we're going to go for a short break right now, but before we do that, we're going to cross over once again to Pritha for some news updates.
Thank you, Muhammad. Some local updates. 65 residents of an apartment block in Kuala Lumpur were forced to vacate their units after a landslide this morning. Fortunately, there were no casualties in the incident, but 24 units of Azalea apartments in Kampong Sri Punchala were determined to be unsafe by authorities. For now, residents are being housed at the Taman Tun Dr. Ismail Community Centre until further notice. As for the cause of the landslide, Kuala Lumpur Mayor Datuk Nur Hisham Ahmad Dahlan said it is believed to have been due to broken drainage culverts. The Malaysia Public Works Institute will look into the possibility of soil movement in the area and conduct periodic monitoring before the preliminary investigation results are available. Meanwhile, the affected area has been cordoned off as a precautionary measure.
Now, following yesterday's arrest of 7 people, including 2 DAP assemblymen, on accusations of supporting and promoting the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam (LTTE), more arrests are expected to be made in the coming days. Bukit Aman's counter-terrorism chief, Dato' Ayub Khan Maiden Piche, said they will be hauled up for allegedly supporting, promoting, recruiting, funding, and being in possession of items related to the Tamil Tigers. He also said that the defunct Sri Lankan rebel group has been classified a terrorist organization by Malaysia. A grass cutter who was working along the shoulders of a road near Krubong Industrial Area yesterday made a gruesome finding: 8 separate human body parts strewn around. Police believe the human remains are thought to be at least 5 days old, and authorities have yet to establish whether they came from more than one individual. The case has been classified as murder. Meanwhile, in Perak, a fisherman pleaded not guilty at the Ipoh Sessions Court today to raping his stepdaughter last November. The 36-year-old victim, who is disabled, was allegedly raped by her father at their house in Kampong Tersusun Baru 7 Leke in Setiawan. The accused was slapped with 10 counts of raping the girl and another 12 sexual assault charges under the Penal Code, with the alleged offences taking place since April 2016, when the girl was 12 years old.
We'll take a short break and we'll be back shortly with more analysis from our special guests. Stay tuned.
And you're still with us on 7Edition's Budget 2020. Still with me on the show is Hawati Abdul Hamid from Khazanah Research Institute, but we are also now joined by Chief Executive Officer of Ringgit Plus, Mr. Han Liu. Welcome to the studio.
Hi, welcome.
Right, now before we get, there's a lot of areas to cover, but before we get into the discussion, let's take a look at this clip.
And being a developed country, obviously, we want to make sure that education is also accessible for everyone. So if we are being integrated in the school, it's together with other hearing students. How do we have access to the education? Let's say if I were to go to the mosque, obviously Friday's sermon is very important, but how could I have access to it? I can go, I can pray there, yes, but I only will get part of it. So recently, when we talk about, coming up to 5G, we are very happy because 5G could actually give the a better access for us, with the technology, so we can communicate via phone, using the technology. We can actually use the video relay service. To actually be connected with other people. So interpreters don't have to come.
Well, there you go, a brief example of the challenges faced by the disabled community. Hamati, let's start with you. Some measures were introduced. First up, 23 million ringgit allocated to ensure school facilities are disabled-friendly. Disabled persons aged 89 and above earning less than 2,000 ringgit will be eligible for the Bantuan Sara Hidup allocation. Another 20 million ringgit for 5 new learning centres to help the disabled. These among others. Is this enough to help improve quality of life significantly for this group of people?
I mean, a small step. We have to start. I mean, I don't really know whether it's adequate or not, but we have to start with something. And then, given that government is taking this initiative, we hope that this can be scaled up by, for example, by other parties like private sector. But I really believe that this type of vulnerable group, these are the people that, because they face this condition that they cannot be economically independent themselves. So it's really important for this type of subgroup being assisted, rather than, for example, like we're trying to address cost of living and to people who are really can go out and work. So, yeah.
Right. What initiative do you see in this budget that can help other groups? You know, for example, the Orang Asli, single mothers, and also single mothers.
Okay, I particularly like that gender issues continue to be something that government put attention. We saw that there are few initiatives that being addressed for women, particularly to increase their participation in the labour market, to actually empower them to be economically independent, for example, and also to help to supplement the family's income. For example, we have these financing facilities for women, giving increased maternity leave, and also this is something new that I saw, that government try to help women returning to work by government providing incentive for hiring, as well as wage incentive for women. But I would like to make a point here that while we are trying to address inequality in the labour market, we should not also forget the inequality at home that women are facing, because a lot of reasons that cited by women why they stay out of work is because of this burden at home. So it's really like trying to equalize this burden at home. For example, for men to take up more care work at home. And another reason that women cited that why they stay out of labour force is due to having to take care of children. So the initiative to really provide childcare centre is something that is positive, but we have to really see the implementation of it, because we know that there are a lot of centres, for example, Permata childcare centre, they are a bit under capacity, probably due to location for women to access, and somehow they resort to all these informal childminder. So yeah, childcare is something that we can look on to actually help free women from this burden at home, and for them to actually participate. But having said that, I also would like to say that probably we should also respect if for women who choose to just stay at home and do all these unpaid care work. And I think that this ICRI is something that government try to value this invisible work that being taken up by women.
Right, thank you. Now, Mr. Ahmad, I'm going to go to you right now. What do you think some of the things highlighted or included in the budget that you think can help families, you know, being a financial planner yourself, a certified financial planner, if I'm not wrong?
Yep. So for me, I was just echoing what the panel said earlier, right? Which is this budget feels very inclusive, right? Everyone's covered. In terms of families, I think there are a couple of things. The first is a continuation of Bantuan Sara Hidup. For me, that's that welfare program needed to be continued, right? It's absolutely essential for families, especially in that B40 group, just to get by, right? And for me, that was the key. The second, I think, is more about not family planning, but planning for when you don't have income anymore. So certain things which contribute to what to do when you're thinking about retirement and saving up money to support either yourself or your family. So the couple of things were, extension of the PRS, private retirement scheme system, to be more flexible, to account for things which are unforeseen, similar to EPF. Right. So here's an example. You need to buy a house. You had some savings in PRS. You need to take it out. You can do so now without penalties. Your child falls sick. You need to pay for medical expenses. You can take it out now without encountering penalties. So that's a couple of things that I think were geared towards financial well-being and just making a better financial state for your family.
Yeah, just talking about healthcare, it's getting more and more expensive every year. And then the new social protection scheme, My Salam, which was included in the budget 2020, also expands its coverage from 36 to 45 major illnesses. What's your take on this?
Oh, for me, My Salam is absolutely essential as a safety net, right? Because I think if you look at the stats coming out from Bank Negara, they're saying, life insurance and also counted in that is critical illness. Life insurance penetration rate is at 55%, right? Or in the mid-50s right now. And majority of people who aren't covered by life insurance are those in, again, that B40 segment, right? Which, again, My Salam is you get it automatically as as part of being a recipient, right? And for me, there's nothing worse than losing income as a result of illness, and this for me is an absolutely crucial safety net, right? So you get if you fall ill from these kind of 45 illnesses, and expansion of illnesses to cover those that stop you being able to work is key, right? And just having that cash payout when you get ill, and having your hospital bills covered, or your daily board and hospital covered, I think it's 50 ringgit a day automatically, is absolutely crucial.
Perfect. Now, I also want to ask you this question, since you are in the business community. There is some incentives meant for small and medium enterprises who can penetrate the overseas market. Yep. And what do you think about this?
No, for me, I think there's two ways to look at it. The first is we need to do two things.
But before that, is it so important to penetrate the overseas market, especially under current, challenging economic climate globally?
No, I think a lot of people assume there's the trade war between the United States and China, and that creates a global risk to global economies. But I think I think our Honourable Finance Minister also said it earlier, which is we in Malaysia are very, very strategically placed to benefit actually from that. And obviously we don't want to benefit from squabbles outside, but we've got to look at the opportunity that Malaysia has as a result of this. And what I mean by that is, if you're a local manufacturer manufacturing something which can be exported, right? There's no better time for you through the government programs, InvestKL, etc., to go out and say, hey, I actually manufacture this. You're a global company manufacturing in China right now. Okay. Why not consider Malaysia? I also manufacture this. Diversify your supply chain. So for me, it's not just should we or should we not do it. For me, it's an opportunity that the global situation has presented to Malaysia, and we should take full advantage of it.
Perfect. Thank you. Now, I believe Pritha has some more news updates for us. Pritha.
Yes, Muhammad. Now, on the foreign front, airlines and train services in Japan are already making cancellations as the country braces for Typhoon Hagibis, expected to hit ashore in Tokyo late Saturday. The approaching typhoon is spreading fear, especially in Chiba, near Tokyo, which was hit by Typhoon Faxai last month. And many residents are still recovering from damage to their homes.
Japan Meteorological Agency urged people to take precautions to avoid potentially life-threatening danger, adding that the country's central Pacific coast might see torrential rains beginning Friday, while high waves and tides might cause flooding. The Joint Typhoon Warning Center has downgraded Hagibis to simply a typhoon from its previous class as a super typhoon, with the storm now sustaining strong winds and gusts of up to 250 kilometers per hour, the equivalent of a Category 4 hurricane. It's forecast to pass out to sea by Sunday afternoon. According to CNN, currently Hagibis is moving north-northwest and is predicted to weaken as it approaches landfall near Tokyo in the next 24 to 36 hours.
Let's take a short break. We'll be back with more insights on Budget 2020. Don't go anywhere.
Being a woman in business actually puts me in a little bit of a dilemma. On one hand, I really support anything that the government does to encourage companies to make it easier for women to have babies and return to the workforce, or to be able to balance their work, their careers, and their family life. So as a woman, I absolutely support that. But at the same time, I'm also a businesswoman and I run a company, and it's a small company. So I completely support the implementation of a higher minimum wage. But I think it cannot be done across the board because it has to take into account other needs. For example, some businesses are not in urban centers. They may not be able to cope with a higher minimum wage. That's one. And number two, also, I think it has to be skills-based. It has to depend on the kind of skills that the worker brings to the table. As a small business, we're also very cognizant of the government's push through Industry Revolution 4.0 for companies to automate, get themselves digitalized. Yes, it's all well and good, but all of these initiatives cost money for us. We want to do it. We want to digitalize our business. We want to offer more features for our customers that are tech-friendly.
Welcome back to 7 Edition Budget 2020. Now, there are several initiatives that were included in the budget aimed at encouraging women to return to work, such as the Women at Work program. The program promises to create 33,000 jobs for women who have stopped working for a year or more, aged between 30 to 50 years old. They will receive 500 ringgit per month for 2 years, and their employers will get a hiring incentive of 300 ringgit. There's also tax breaks for registered nurseries, which have also doubled from 1,000 ringgit to 2,000 ringgit. And last but not least, a 200 ringgit fund has also been set up for women entrepreneurs. What do you think these measures? How do you think these measures can encourage women to return to the workforce?
Yeah, as I mentioned just now, women actually face this double burden. If they go to work, they also have this responsibility at home. And a lot of the reason at the same time, women cited why they can't participate in the labour market is due to care work that they have to undertake at home. So that's why I'm trying to emphasize here that trying to also address inequality of this unpaid care work is also important, and the initiative, for example, to introduce more setup of childcare center is something that can actually facilitate women to free up this burden at home and participate. And then we know that, for example, this child cost is also not cheap, particularly in urban area. KRI did a study recently that we found out by the usual threshold we should be spending on childcare, for example, it should be just around 10% of our budget, but in KL they spend, for example, up to 15%. So this accessibility and affordability of childcare is something that probably, if we address properly, can help women to participate more in economic activity.
Mr. Hunt, there's also this initiative called Malaysian at Work. How do you think this will boost the economy?
I mean, for me, it's a clear one, right? Which is Malaysia at Work, which is the umbrella across both all graduates, women, TVET as well, I think, and more locals coming to work is going to be key. Two areas. One, just getting people to work is a multiplier effect, right? They earn income. And they contribute back to the economy. So that's a nice simple one. The second one, which is kind of less obvious, is the incentive back to the person going back to work, whether it's a graduate or a woman or someone going for a local taking over a job that was previously for a foreigner, is that incentive gets put into somebody's EPF account rather than straight in. So for me, that's important, right? Because there's been so much talk, and we've done our study ourselves, that almost 90% of people feel EPF isn't enough today. And for just having that safety net of having 12,000 ringgit in your EPF account over that 2-year period is so key.
Right. Now, we're going to move on to incentives and measures introduced in the budget relating to the 5G technology, which is set to boost business productivity, among others. And we'll toss over to my colleague, Pritha, once again, for the details.
Right, Muhammad. Now, the government is giving a lot of attention in accelerating the digital economy in Budget 2020 with an allocation of over 1.2 billion ringgit. Now, this includes introducing the 5G ecosystem development grant worth 50 million ringgit to seed technological developments by Malaysian companies to ride on the global 5G wave. Now, 25 million ringgit will be given to set up as a fund to spur more pilot projects on digital applications such as drone delivery, autonomous vehicles, as well as other products and services utilizing fiber optics and 5G infrastructure. Now, and this does not include the National Fiberization and Connectivity Plan, NCFP, which costs a massive 21.6 billion ringgit. This plan will be jointly financed by the government and local telecommunications companies. Now, here's more of the highlights in the budget on the government's plans to further carry out the digital push.
Without connectivity or access to the internet, any efforts to push digitalization or e-economy will be futile. Towards this, the government is allocating 250 million ringgit to improve connectivity in remote areas, especially Sabah and Sarawak, through various technologies including satellite broadband connectivity. Another 210 million ringgit will be spent to accelerate deployment of new digital infrastructure for public buildings, particularly schools. The government is also allocating 10 million ringgit to grow local champions in creating digital contents, including e-games, animation, and digital arts. To encourage companies to upgrade their systems, including point of sale, the government is providing a 5% matching grant, or up to 5,000 ringgit. 500 million ringgit has been put aside to help 2,000 manufacturing and services companies to automate their operations. To provide a safer environment for online transactions, the government is giving out a one-off 30 ringgit digital stimulus to help Malaysians aged 18 and above to open their own identity-verified wallet account. This involves an allocation of 450 million ringgit and is expected to benefit 15 million Malaysians.
Mr. Han, 30 ringgit credit into the e-wallet of every Malaysian. What's your take on this? This is really new and it's actually pretty interesting. So,
yeah, no, I got a couple of takes on it. Honestly, it's really quite interesting. You're right. It's 15 million Malaysians, those earning under 100,000 ringgit a year, everyone above 18 years. And for me, that's interesting, right? For me, it's the government's push for Malaysia to become a cashless society. I think that's great. I mean, it's interesting when governments get involved. I mean, India did something interesting 2 years ago with demonetization. They removed large notes from their currency, which just forced everyone into e-wallets. And I think the Malaysian government is doing the same. A couple of things interesting, which is you get the money, what do you do with it? You're going to spend it on something to eat, I guess, or an e-hailing ride. But the other thing that the government should probably think about is to put that money into e-wallets that don't necessarily allow cash outs, right? Because then that defeats the purpose. You put money into e-wallet, then you allow the person to cash it out. You're not pushing that cashless society kind of mindset, right? So that's my take on it. A couple of things.
Right, but there are also a lot of e-wallets out there in Malaysia.
Yep.
And then what do you think about this? Like, I don't think that's good for the whole.
No, I think having competition is always good. I think Bank Negara has over 40 e-wallet licenses out there. That scares some people, but actually, in my mind, it's great because more competition is it's better for consumers, better for Malaysians because it's simple, right? If there's more competition for your attention or your money, they're going to offer you a better deal to use them. And I think it's not the business of government to decide which e-wallet should get this money. It should be the consumers. But the only thing that I think the government should decide is, hey, we should only allow cash that credit in to e-wallets which don't allow cash outs. I think that's probably something that needs to be thought out properly before they fully go ahead with it next year.
But there's going to be a lot of idle monies with a lot of e-wallets.
Yeah.
And that's not good for the economy. Should the government perhaps limit the number of e-wallets in Malaysia, to address that specifically?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it would probably be some sort of threshold of is there enough merchants which offer these e-wallets as a payment option? Because what you don't want is putting 30 ringgit credit into an e-wallet which isn't active from either a consumer standpoint or a merchant standpoint, because then that defeats the purpose of pushing Malaysia towards that cashless society, right? If nobody has anywhere to spend it or to use it, then that totally defeats the purpose of that initiative.
Okay. Right, we're going to take a short break right now, but don't go away. We'll be discussing a lot more on Budget 2020 after the break.
We're back with more on Budget 2020. Thanks for staying tuned. Now let's take a look at things from a broader perspective. According to Moody's last year, Malaysia's economic growth would likely slow down in the next 2 years as a weak global economic outlook could weigh on commodity prices. This is what the data shows. Without a recession in the US and Europe in 2020, then there could be a rebound in global growth in 2021 and 2022. The US-China trade war already has an impact on global trade and the economy, and in the worst case scenario, it could disrupt supply chains and lead to a recession in the US and hurt Malaysia. Now back to Muhammad to see what our guests have to say about how this budget can help us face these challenges.
Right, thank you, Pritha. Now, with Professor Raja, who has joined us once again, what do you think came out from this budget that can help us face these challenges?
I think one of the situations that we'll have to face is the fact that most organizations are actually projecting a recession next year, including UNCTAD, which is probably the most conservative in relation to making that sort of a point.
But also some people are saying that recession might be delayed a little bit in view of the US presidential election, which is scheduled for November next year.
Yeah, but in what way will that affect them unless Trump simply
manipulate the
goes
market
back
by reducing?
See, what has happened in the US is this. The initial attempt is to bring back investments. So you raise tariffs on imports. The consequence is you're bringing back, what do you actually see is a vacuum cleaner, that sort of effect. It actually attracts back simply because you want to jump tariffs and so on. But there's a limit to that, because once you attract back those firms, and you have a situation where the cost of production there is higher, they are there not because they have much cheaper costs elsewhere, no, but because they have higher tariffs. And these firms that are relying on the US market are back there, but their production costs are going to escalate. What that actually would mean is that it will make their exports more expensive.
Right.
In fact, that recession is felt already in the US. And I haven't seen the current US government actually addressing that. So to look at, to assume that that recession will be delayed, I'm not one who's optimistic about that.
All right.
Because the figures are showing now.
But it's going to look bad on Trump, because he's going to running for president for president again next year.
Yes, of course.
And if recession really does happen, that's going to be bad for him. I mean, he doesn't want to be a president during a recession time.
If you take that sort of a conjecture, yes. But Trump has acted in many different ways that doesn't suggest that that would be his trend. I mean, can you imagine at this point Trump taking a reverse turn and telling, no, we are not going to have any more tariffs on China. China can bring back all the solar panel firms back to China and export to us. It doesn't look possible. I mean, that one sometimes have to look back at the conduct of presidents. He hasn't actually given any impression that that's what he's going to do.
Right. Mr. Han, the Prime Minister said today after the tabling that there was something for everyone in the 2020 budget and that many people are happy. Do you agree with this?
I certainly agree with there being something for everyone. I said earlier, I think this budget feels very inclusive. It feels like, every single group is being taken care of in some little way. There's no specific, hey, this is our target group, and we're just going to focus everything on this one group. It feels like everyone's got a little bit. In terms of whether people are happy about it, I think it's a bit early to say, right? It's just been announced today. I think there will be some people who will be very happy about it, namely people like us, myself in the digital economy. There's been a lot of focus on that, and it's really pleasing to hear the government making that a core tenet of a core pillar of the way forward. But there may be some people who may go, hey, what about us? I'm in a group which is maybe I got a couple of things, but I'm in the M40 group, for example. I've got a couple of things which I can benefit from, the petrol subsidy, etc. But maybe I might not be too happy. So that's the kind of broad consensus, I think.
Professor, do you agree with this? Do you think that majority of Malaysians are happy with the
I assume
budget?
that they'll be happy, because most of the time people are looking at immediate effects. But I'm not particularly happy, though. The reason is, are we actually dealing with...
From the point of view of
yes, no. I mean, from the point of view of an economist, are we actually dealing with a population that's got an incidence of poverty 2016 as 0.4%? That has actually dropped from 49 from 3% in 1970. What it actually means is that we have...
I'm sorry, what's that number for again?
49.3% in 1970.
Poverty, okay.
Yeah. What actually has happened is this. Using a compounded interest rate, inflation rate of about 3.5%, the 50 ringgit that was then the poverty line income is actually 980 ringgit in 2016. That basket hasn't changed to reflect the structural change we have faced. The essentials and the income that Pritha showed just now, and you mentioned about you yourself being poor, you can't afford a house. Now, these are things most countries would have taken account of, and we haven't. And Dr. Phillips made the comment, the UN special reporter, he made the comment that we're cheating with statistics. Not only that, we have lots of people who are not in the enumeration because they are in areas where you don't access them, but you also have used an income that's somewhat outmoded from 1970. I would have expected that we actually looked at everything carefully and then planned. And then we can say we are 15% or 17% really poor people to say that we need to bring benefits to the B40 people. That's the sort of way I think I would have pursued this argument. And in that sort of context, let me mention that there are two key things that I would have expected. And most of our budgets tend to be popular. It's not just the last two budgets or the budget before. The good thing about it is you have a fiscal deficit that's going down, a trend decline to 3.2%. That's nice, which suggests that probably corruption is not the order of the day, because they are actually not reducing fiscal expenditure. But what's important here is, are they reviewing, are they doing a proper audit on all the subsidies that they're giving? And are these target groups are actually benefiting? And of course, you saw the figures up there. So many people got involved in the study, the stakeholders and organizations. But inclusive also means all target groups are somewhat reflected there. It's not just about looking at the indicators. That's the first part of it. The second part of it is then audit done in enabling these people. It's not just enough to provide the subsidy so that you'll have what you call kemiskinan tegar, which is persistent poverty. If you have generations of people just hanging there, you haven't solved the problem. Remember, the reason why you target incomes to the poor is not just about feeding them because you don't want to see them suffer. It's also about enabling their minds to realize the creative self. How much intelligent people like him can be. The capacity for him to innovate is not as much as, say, a few million people who haven't got the ability, the time, the space, and the resources to think and reflect. Human beings are the only ones that are active in that process, even though you can have robots. So these are areas I haven't seen very much by way of the presentation. Perhaps it's coming in the next few months.
Mr. Han, talking about housing, the threshold on high-rise property prices in urban areas for foreign ownership will be lowered to 600,000 ringgit from 1 million ringgit previously. It seems to me like this is a bailout for the developers.
No,
what's your view on this?
I think. Look, I think it's been well publicized. There's a property overhang, right, at that top rate, and for me, we're being pragmatic about it, right? We can call it bailout. You can call it, hey, look, we're letting a bit of the free market come in, right? Which is, hey, like we've got to get rid of these inventories because they are not doing anything for the economy right now. They're just stuck in building materials, right? So for me, I think whatever it takes to get rid of that inefficiency in our housing market is laudable, but I think one of the caveats I think it should come with is, hey, like if we allow this, we're going to have to crack down a little bit and have more inclusive policy for property building, right? Which is, I'm going to do this for you, dear property developers, just so you can get money back into the economy and not stuck in, building materials. However, it's not. The government should not be in business to build properties, but it should be in business to. It should be creating policies which stop this from ever happening again, essentially.
Professor, don't you think this initiative will encourage the property developers to continue developing expensive properties? Because they know that at a certain point, with or without property overhang, the government is going to interfere and, like I said, help them bail out. So,
some 4 or 5 years ago, I was on BFM radio, and I said you need to have capital gains tax of at least 50%. And the house or the property owned should be owned for 5 years, not anything less. You could probably reduce after 3 years. At the moment, it's 30% over the 30 years. Then they reduce gradually to the 5th year and 5% after that. That's following from last year. But I think that's not good because economics talks about different kinds of goods. House is a utility. It needs to reach everyone, but it's not a public good. A public good is non-excludable and non-rivalrous. Means once you create knowledge, the knowledge is there. Even though you patent it and so on, a lot of it gets seeped through and so on. And once created, you don't incur more costs because it's already done. A public utility is excludable, like health, power, water, and it's also rivalrous. To provide more, you need to have much more expenditure involved. So in that sort of context, you have actually seen now an environment where the market looks to be in trouble. Why? Because between supply and demand, there is no match, there's no equilibrium. And that problem was not created by the market itself. It wasn't, because the government seems to have preferred the developers. And the point that you're making, 97, remember, the first major crisis that actually reduced house prices of expensive houses, we brought in under the Malaysia Second Home Program to clear this excess and so on. In that sort of manner, you are unlikely to meet the needs of the people if you want most of them, including you, to have a house. So my point is very clear. You need to introduce, like in the US, you pay as you earn, pay as you capital gains, also on shares. You need to have at least a small percentage on those things to reduce speculation there and also to reduce speculation here. Second, the house, because of the land involved, is a finite resource. In many countries, not just China, Indochina, a foreigner can only lease. I mean, in China, both the local and the foreigner can only have a lease. But in this case here, you can only, so they should have had that sort of principle because land is a finite resource. They should have ensured that because of the nature of supply demand involving a finite resource and it's an essential good,
Right.
those controls should have been in place.
Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for this program. Thank you so much, Han Liu and Professor Raja, as well
Thank
as
you.
Hawati, who was with us earlier, for joining us and breaking down Budget 2020 for us. To our viewers, what do you think? Let us know on our Facebook and Twitter. I'm Muhammed Hamdan, and on behalf of my co-host Pritha Manivannan, thanks for tuning in and see you next time.